doctors and psychologists, they don't assess for depersonalization. They don't ask if the person is have those feelings. Like they will ask if the person is feeling down, or if the person is feeling like anxious, but they will not ask those things. So the professionals need to be educated as well, like to know this condition.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Lucas Luvisson. Lucas is a clinical psychologist based in Porto Alegre, Brazil. In 2017, in his second year of college, Lucas developed chronic depersonalization and derealization after a bad weed experience. Fortunately, he has since recovered. Lucas subsequently wrote his undergraduate thesis about depersonalization, and last year joined a master's program where his research project is going to be focused on the investigation of psychological processes and their relation to depersonalization. As Lucas wrote to me in a recent email, quote, "At the time my DP started, I didn't know your channel yet, nor the manual. But recently I started to watch the recovery stories and was amazed by the common features that they shared, which generated insights for my project. Going forward in my career, I'm looking forward to contributing to the development of effective psychological treatments for depersonalization," end quote. And Lucas is with us today to talk about his experience with, recovery from, and research into depersonalization disorder. Lucas, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Hello, Sean. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the channel. Lucas, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Lucas. I am 28 years old. I am a psychologist. I work as a clinical psychotherapist. I like football, like the average Brazilian. I like astronomy, and it's great to be here talking to you.
Yeah, super. Are you working in a practice or in a clinic, or what's your kind of day-to-day like?
I like mostly by myself. Like most of my work is online. Like I work with patients in my home, the computer, and like a individual practice.
Great, that's great to hear. So Lucas, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with DPDR and how did that start for you?
Sure. So as you said, it all started in 2017. I was like 22 years old at that time, and it started after a bad weed experience. I was invited to a birthday party, and I went with a friend of mine that he was like introducing me to cannabis, and actually I had smoked it 1 week before that, and that was a good experience. I remember laughing a lot and having fun. That was the first time I ever smoked. But the second time that was this birthday party, we went to there, and we were like already smoking, and I was very inexperienced in that world, so I didn't know about dosage and how much you could use of it. So I smoked it, and when we got there to the actual party, like the house that the party was taking part, there was more more weeds, and I thought I will smoke more. And so in some minutes I started to feel my mouth drying, like getting dried, and the floor started to like float or kind of moving. I started to got very scared about the things that were happening, and after some minutes, I was like 100% certain that I was going to die. I was like very, very afraid, and like a very frightening bodily experience. And I started begging for people to take me to the hospital. And well, they saw that it was just like a bad trip, and they didn't take me to the hospital. And I remember thinking that like I was going to die, and I remember a particular thought that was like, this is the most idiot way someone will ever die. Like it's my mother will be very mad at me the way I died. Like so after some time I like just accepted that I was going to die. Like I sat down and, well, okay, so this is my fate. And of course there were people that were helping me, like trying to calm me down. And it lasted like I think 1 or 2 hours of intense fear and anxiety. It was very frightening. But a curious thing that happened at that time is that I woke up the next day, and I was okay. I didn't depersonalization didn't appear yet, like or I didn't notice it. Like I don't know. I remember taking the bus to go home. That was okay. I got to my house. Then in that next day, I remember that the same friend, he called me and to go to his home for us to just talk. And he was like smoking again, and I don't know what I had passed in my mind, but like let's do it a second chance. Like maybe this time it will be different. But it was just instant. I got instantly panicky, like just to put the thing in my mouth. Like there was a strong like association with anxiety. And I told him that I was going to my home. And the next day was when I woke up feeling very strange, feeling very disconnected, like with the environment, like I was in a dream or in a movie. So that was the onset. That it was like a Monday, I think, like when I woke up and was feeling very, very strange. So this is how it all happened.
Mm-hmm. Right. Must have been quite a scary experience to be at a party, particular mm-hmm. with that's happening, and there's, I guess, people like kind of moving all around you, and mm-hmm. you know, there's a lot happening in the visual and audio field.
Yeah.
And Lucas, do you think, like looking back on it now, do you think it was like this, that the weed that you smoked beforehand was okay, but the weed at the party was maybe was much stronger than you had anticipated? Or what in retrospect, what do you think happened?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the the dosage, something like I smoked it twice and that it got very intense, or if it was the type of weed. Like I remember it being like a light green, a lighter green weed. I don't know nothing about the types of weed, like, but it was, I was having fun at first, but at the second time when this all got very scary.
Yeah. I would have had a similar experience with my experience with weed, in that after I had the very, very frightening weed experience, I was okay. Like once I came down, I felt like I was fine, and then even the next day, it was the next kind of week or two, I felt fine. Then I had another panic attack that kind of that set me off. But it sounds like that may have been sped up by smoking again on the second day in your case, Lucas. So at that point, Lucas, what can you tell us some more about the symptoms that you started to experience?
Yeah, the strongest symptom was was like this disconnection with the environment, and also with my own image in the mirror. Like it kind of was very strange to see myself in the mirror. I remember also having those temporal kind of distortions, like when you look at the clock and it's 9 p.m. but it don't feels like it's 9 p.m. It could be like 9 a.m. And I had this kind of, but I didn't have like hyperemotionality or physical numbness.
And were you like, what were you doing on that Monday? So you woke up, did you have to go to work, or were you studying at that stage, or how, did you just go about your day as normal?
Yeah, I was working like a part-time job in an office, in an office, in an auto parts office, like, and I had to go, and I was very my anxiety was very intense, and I got the bus and went to there, and trying to play normal, like we do when you have this talking to talk to people like normal. And actually I was when I was at the office, I like found the name for at the same day I found the name for what I was feeling.
Wow.
Actually, when you put like feeling unreal or feeling like you were in a dream in Google, it instantly will return some depersonalization page. That's a good thing. But the same day I found out what was happening with me. I remember that. Mm-hmm.
So and like, did you kind of understand that quickly, that like, so you had maybe a panic attack on the weed, that had triggered depersonalization? Wow, that's amazing that like you kind of had it figured out in 24 hours, in under 24 hours. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
That's really good to hear. So so when you found that, Lucas, did that calm you down a bit, or were you just kind of like going down the research rabbit hole, or how was that?
At first it was like a good. I got calmer to discover, but I think it, just as you said, when you start to go to the forums and you see people's stories, like I'm 10 years like this, I'm 20 years with this. It's seeing your videos. The Brazilian DP community is very similar. We have people go to forums, like there are people that will complain about their symptoms, very people with very chronic depersonalization that will put their stories, and other people like that will see that story and will be like frightened. So it's I did that too, habit hole, like you said.
So you found out what it was quite quickly. So what did you do then over the coming days, weeks, and months?
So I tried to hide my symptoms from my parents. I was like certain that they would not understand. Like if I said, well, I smoked the weed and I'm like this now, you know. So I have an older brother that is someone that is very close to me. So I said to my parents that I was going to his home to see him, and at the time I like scheduled a psychiatrist by myself to talk to him, and I went to the psychiatrist like 1 or 2 days later, and he prescribed me like benzodiazepine, like this is the word, like a a med to calm down, like, but just to decrease the anxiety. And I've gone to my brother's home and told him what was happening. He understood, but I was at a state of I was having panic attacks, like 1 or 2 per day, like so. But so after some days, I had to return to my home, and I decided to tell my parents what was happening, because I was kind of visibly very anxious and very uneasy. My father, I don't know if it's the experience of someone with depersonalization, but my father thought I was like drug addicted, like he didn't understand that I had used one time, and he thought that I was drug addicted. He would drive me to the psychiatrist, but to start treatment for depersonalization, but he thought I was treating for a drug addiction. So this was like kind of curious. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when you went to the psychiatrist, Lucas,
Mm-hmm.
did you describe the symptoms, and did they recognize depersonalization, or did you kind of have to show them on Google, or how was that experience?
Like I think she didn't know much about the personalization. She started the treatment, the usual treatment for panic disorder. You know, so I took like antidepressants. I think that the name in English is like Lexapro.
Mm-hmm.
That was the med that I took. So also I also tried therapy at the time, but my psychologist, she also treated me for panic disorder. But you know, after 2 or 3 weeks, I wasn't having more panic attacks, but the personalization remained. So the treatment wasn't like being very effective, I think. Mm-hmm.
So at that stage, Lucas, and I know you went on to like start your career in psychology, but was psychology something that you were kind of aiming for as a career at that point in your life as well?
Yeah, I started before the depersonalization
Episode, yeah.
episode. Yeah. So I think since high school, I was like very, very interested in psychology. Like my friends liked to talk to me. Like I was a good listener. I was always a good listener. So before that, I was in that career path, I think. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. This, you know, it's something uh that you were moving towards that career path, and then, you know, something like DPDR or any anxiety-based condition would kind of hit you just as you were about to kind of go into it.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
so, and then Lucas, in the time that you're experiencing depersonalization, was there a particular low point for you? Was there a time that you kind of still remember as being particularly difficult?
Sort of believing that it will last like forever, or that it was like something that was not the personalization. It was like something that was even worse. Like I remember one day, like I was talking to a college friend, and she said something like, "Well, do you know that some people that smoke weed they develop schizophrenia?" uh, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's it, schizophrenia." So I had some very bad times, but something that you talked before, like the career path. I also had like some kind of positive approach to depersonalization, or for the symptoms. I remember saying to my therapist one day, like that experience would lead me to be more empathetic with my clients, because I would know what they are passing. So I had kind of a positive approach sometimes to my symptoms, like seeing this as a kind of experience that had some value, and other times like very afraid and very frightened by that, by those thoughts that or those catastrophic interpretations that I had. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned it, Lucas. I recently did an interview that so by the time this is up on YouTube, that interview will be up as well. But and it's with a girl who is an undergrad in psychology, and when she developed DPDR, her first thought was, "Well, I won't be able to be a therapist because this I'm not normal enough, like this experience will like preclude me from being a therapist." And then at the end of the experience, I mean, we were discussing it, saying like, it's the opposite. Like if you've gone through like a particularly difficult experience like this and you start working in therapy, I mean, you will be able to connect with people on a much more powerful level, because you'll be able to speak to them from a perspective of experience. So it's ultimately a very good thing. So with that in mind, Lucas, how long did your experience last, and also how did your recovery start?
Well, it lasted. I have this. It has like 6 years since I got recovered, so it's difficult to remember. But I have this number that I always when I'm asked, I say that is like it lasted for 3 months, because it was in my mind. I kept 3 months having depersonalization from the time I woke up till the time I would fall asleep. And I remember being I don't remember how the recovery started, or I think I just noticed that the things were back to normal, kind of back to normal. After those 3 months, I had some episodes that were intense, like like lasting for like one day or several hours. Yeah. So after those 3 months, I had some episodes, like, and I was like thinking that, okay, this came back and it will stay for some time. But after the months were passing, it was getting each time less frequent, and over time, like it stopped. Not forever. Like as I said to you in the email, I still have some spare episodes with the personalization, but they last like minutes or hours. Mm-hmm.
And so were you were still working in the motor parts space at this point, Lucas, or were you were studying at this point as well, maybe?
No, I'm working. I'm doing my master's and working with the clinic. Mm-hmm.
No, I mean back then at that point.
Okay. Yeah, I was still working there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so then,
and I was studying psychology. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you went, and then when you recovered, you had this experience in your past and under your belt, we'll say, and then as your career in psychology was, or your studies in psychology were continuing, you thought to yourself, well, this would, I mean, of all the things I could start to research or focus on, it's the thing that I went through, you know? Yeah.
Like after I was like out of it, I started going to the forums and like trying to, I created like WhatsApp groups, or I was like managing WhatsApp groups with people with depersonalization. And I wasn't a psychologist yet. I couldn't work with people. Like I didn't even could, like, because I didn't know how to, to work. I was not ready yet, but I tried to at that time I tried to help people, like telling my story and things like that. They talking to them to do some things that I thought that could work for them, like to alleviate the symptoms. So, and also I started to research about the personalization, and I was always very interested in it. I was like 100% sure that I would work with it after in my professional life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. And so when you got people, so were these people in the WhatsApp groups, were these people who you kind of met on forums, and you just said, okay, well, jump into the group and I'll give you a bit of personal advice. And also, Lucas, how did people respond to that when you were doing that? I mean, were you kind of getting messages at all hours, or were you just kind of like posting messages once a day, or how did that work?
The groups were more like the forums, like everyone could talk in the group,
right?
So it wasn't like as every forum, it wasn't very very healthy for some people. Like there were people just like complaining and saying that this was never going away, or saying that depersonalization was something that was very other thing, like brain damage, or so what I tried was like to counter these things, like, no, see, like this is a treatable disorder. You have to accept it. You have to keep it with your life. Like I was trying to counteract these trends in the groups. That was all I could do at the time. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what was the next step in your career after that, Lucas? So it would have been the so you wrote your undergraduate thesis about depersonalization. So what was what was that about? What did you focus on, a specific aspect of depersonalization, or the causes of it, or what did you focus on?
So one thing that called my attention was like I saw depersonalization as something that is very similar to a condition that is called chronic pain. Like Not in the the symptoms, but like the chronic pain is like a condition that the person will feel every day, like they will not find much to alleviate the symptoms. Like they can take a med that will cease the symptoms to exist. Also, they start avoiding places, avoiding situations, avoiding the job, like the friends, because of the pain. So and I thought, well, it looks like depersonalization. After people start feeling like this, they will try. They will fail to they will fail to find something to alleviate the symptoms, like to diminish depersonalization, and they will start avoid like all things that start to increase the symptoms, or as they don't feel like themselves, they will like stop avoiding situations that they were doing before. So I looked at it and thought, well, maybe a similar treatment would work. And like the gold standard for chronic pain is something called acceptance and commitment therapy. Have you ever heard about it? So I looked at the literature, and there was nothing. So I thought, well, maybe I can start like a path here, like to investigate if this therapy or this psychological approach could help people with depersonalization. And like on my undergraduate thesis, I couldn't do like no intervention study or something like this. So what I did was I sent to people that were in the university. Like my subjects were psychology and nurse students at my university, and I sent them the CDS, the Cambridge Depersonalization Scale, and I sent them a psychological flexibility questionnaire that is a concept that exists in the acceptance and commitment therapy, to see if there was like a positive or negative correlation about symptoms of depersonalization and psychological flexibility. That is this ability to be open and to be to see your thoughts are just thoughts, not just literal truth, like. And I didn't explain what psychological flexibility is, but is this ability to to be open to your feelings or to your thoughts, and for the things that you feel, to not be so connected and so fused with your thoughts, like they were 100% true, like holding your holding your thoughts lightly, while you do things that are important to your life, your values and goals. Like if you can follow in the present moment the things that are important to you. So this is all the ACTS, acceptance and commitment therapy acronym. Like this is all that ACTS preconizes. Like, so my undergrad thesis was about this. I wanted to see if people with more symptoms of depersonalization would be more or less psychological flexibly, So, and the results were interesting. Like we found a moderate negative correlation between depersonalization and psychological flexibility. So this was my first research approach to the field.
Can you explain the negative connection or negative correlation in just in very simple terms for me, Lucas?
It's like this: people that are more psychological flexibly, in my people that responded my research. People that are more flexibly, psychological flexibly, tend to have to score less on the CDS, on the depersonalization, and people that score more, like have more depersonalization symptoms, tend to be less psychological flexibility. Like this is the correlation. Mm-hmm.
Fascinating, and I guess it makes sense in terms of, you know, when we know that like 75% of people will experience DPDR at some point in their lives, but for the vast majority of those people, it just lasts for a couple of minutes or a couple of hours. But what their experience of it is this, it's just this kind of weird feeling that happens briefly, but they're busy doing other stuff, so they don't focus on it and panic that it means that something is wrong. In the same way that for most people who experience heart palpitations, they'll just kind of say, oh, you know, my heart's beating a bit too quickly, I should probably have a cup of decaffeinated coffee. But for some people, they'll keep focusing on it and panicking and causing the heart rate to increase and the anxiety to go up. Mm-hmm. But very, very interesting that you did that. You were able to conduct that study. And also retrospectively then, Lucas, in terms of your own recovery, how did you understand your own recovery in terms of that study? Did you look back at your own experience and think, okay, that makes sense?
Yeah, as I said, I can't remember much of my recovery. One thing is that maybe that positive approach that I had to the symptoms, like you said just right now, people that seem to develop a chronic depersonalization disorder, they tend to have a very negative approach to the symptoms. Like they had it one time and look that there is something strange, like it may be something worse, like, you know, like those thoughts, like feedback the loop there is there is this thing happening. So I had some kind of positive approach, or like not so negative. And also one thing that I did that makes sense with the studies is like I kept doing things even when I got scared by the things. Like I loved to go to parties, and parties are places that you have like the low light and you have around several people around you, and I got very scared by parties, but I kept doing it. Like I had to go home sometimes because I was like just very uneasy with the experience, but I kept doing. And I think it's an important. Later we can talk about some of the possible psychological or clinical interventions that can help people with depersonalization. But I think this kind of exposure to fearful situations is something that for some people may be important. If you start to avoid everything, it's going to become more chronic, like
Absolutely. And I think in kind of when I look back on my own experience as well, that like when it first happened, I very, very quickly got into patterns of avoidance. So I stopped working. I was a full-time musician at the time, so it was like, I mean, you're going to bars, there's like, full of people playing guitar, singing. And so that I was like, oh, I absolutely can't do that. And also I kind of made it my mission. Somebody described this to me recently as saying, like, when I developed DPDR, that became my full-time job. That became my 9 to 5, and then working late as well. Because it felt like the correct thing to do, like it felt like the safe option. Because when you get, like, if you get a cold or a flu or something, like you stay home, for a couple of days, you drink plenty of liquid, you get some rest, and then you get better. And I kind of took that same approach in that, like, I thought, well, okay, well, the best thing I can do is go home, stay with my parents for a while, and I'll wait for this to pass, and I'll just take it easy. So I won't be exercising, I won't be kind of meeting people, and I think a lot of people do that, and it's with the best of intentions, because you think, well, this is what I do when I'm sick, but ultimately, what you're actually doing is you're creating patterns of like, well, I can't do this and I can't do this, and the longer you do it, the harder it is to get out of it. Now, you can always get out of it, but I think that's and then of course at the same time you're on the forums and you're kind of reinforcing those patterns, and also there's the period of time between when it starts, the condition starts, and finding out what it is, which for a lot of people, I mean, it's amazing that you found it within 24 hours. It's so good to hear. But for a lot of people, myself included, it can be weeks or months and months and months before they even years before they figure out, oh, this is the thing I have, which just kind of, even if you try and get out of those avoidance patterns, if you're not sure what you have, that's always going to scare you. That's always going to terrify you. And because I have this mysterious condition that just goes up and down. I don't know what's causing it. I don't even know if there's a name for it. So I think this, like, to a great degree, like those kind of, once people find out what the condition is and get out of those avoidance patterns, that's really when the recovery process starts to speed up. And I'm thrilled that it happened for you so quickly. I mean, and that you've been able to bring that forward. One question I wanted to ask you as well, Lucas, was, speaking to your parents about it, and your father, worrying that you were, a drug addict. But in the recovery process, how did you speak to them about it and kind of explain what we're going through? I mean, I'm sure they were extremely relieved to have you back to your old self, but how was the relationship with them and with your friends as well?
Yeah, like my mother, my brother, and my friends, they all knew, and also my father. Like, I think that he until these days he didn't understand yet what was happening, but he passed away some years ago. But I was very open about it, even talking to you today. Like, I told my mother, my brother, and my friends, like, that I would be able to share my experience, like what happened to me, like. So yeah, I could, after all, I could like be very open about depersonalization with people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Your cat seems pretty happy about it too.
Yeah, I have 3 cats here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Around.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then moving forward, then Lucas, can you tell me a bit more about the master's program? Your research project is focused on the investigation of psychological processes. So is this building on the previous research that you did, or are you focusing on a different aspect of the condition?
So it is it's very similar to what I have done in my undergrad, like, but I will. My masters have two parts. Like, in one part I will do like something that looks like my undergrad, but this time I will look for people that have depersonalization. Like, I will go to the forums and I will send them, and I will, so that time I did with undergrad students in the university. So people that don't have the condition responded to the questionnaires, like, so, but I'm now I want to get the people that have chronic depersonalization, like, or people that feel depersonalization, so then so they will respond. We don't have in Brazil like an epidemiological study with depersonalization, but I think it's like around 1 or 2%, like in the rest of the world. And I want them to respond to the questionnaires, and but this time instead of doing something like this correlational, because in a correlation like if in a correlation study, like you see that one thing is higher when the other thing is lower, you can say that something like causes the other. Like I can say that psychological flexibility causes less depersonalization, or I can say that people that are that have feeling that can be open to her feelings or his feelings, and be open to his thoughts and follow a life that is fulfilling. I can say that it's because of that depersonalization will occur more or less, because it's just a correlation, so this time what I want to do is like mediation study. Like I will take depersonalization, the score in depersonalization. Then I will take the depression, anxiety, and stress like an outcome, and I want to see if its psychological flexibility will be mediating this relation. Like if people, even in the presence of greater depersonalization symptoms, will develop less depression, anxiety, and stress if they have more psychological flexibility, because the research is very clear about the fact that people with depersonalization will have like a very strong functional impairment in their lives. Like, so all this thing that we were talking right now, like quitting job and avoiding situations, avoiding interactions, and over time they will develop depression, exactly because their lives will be different. They will develop stress, depression, and anxiety. So this time this study is a bit different.
I find it so interesting that like I remember speaking to one of the leading researchers in DPDR in the United Kingdom, and asking him
Anthony David.
Yes. Anthony David.
Yeah I know all the guys, well, not personally, but I'm reading all of them. So the names are very clear in my mind.
Yes, and Anthony David. Yeah, so I interviewed Anthony for an article I was writing for Eon, which is this kind of online kind of magazine / journal type thing. But I asked him about, I mean, he's so knowledgeable about this stuff, but I asked him, like, how is it possible that like depersonalization is so common? So if it's like 1 in 50 people like develop this in its chronic form, and 75% of people will experience it in its transient form, how on earth is it possible that it's not better known? And he said, well, it's actually very simple. And he said, one of the main reasons is just that it's very hard to describe. So for a patient who develops these, like this kind of, this group of symptoms, and they're trying to describe it, and words often fail. Like, I mean, I remember describing it back in the day and saying things like, I felt like my memory was being fragmented. Like, that was one way of describing it. So there's so many different kind of ways of attempting to describe it. Whereas with a different condition, like a different anxiety-based condition like claustrophobia or agoraphobia, the description of the symptoms tends to be much more simplified, because there are specific kind of environmental factors that you're referring to. So when I get into an elevator, it gets bad. When I get into when I walk out in the open, it gets bad. And so because of that, it tends. Oh, and also people tend not to describe it, or they will minimize the symptoms in the description because they're afraid that they're going to sound crazy. Yeah. Which was something I was terrified of as well. I thought, but I'm going to be like sent off like at the end of the day, if I describe what I'm actually experiencing. So because of that, it tends to be diagnosed less. Also, when doctors or when medical professionals hear those symptoms, they will often just say, well, what you're experiencing is anxiety, which is correct. It is based on anxiety, but because of those circumstances, again, it's another reason for it to not be described as or diagnosed as depersonalization. So because there's so few diagnoses of it, it becomes very difficult to research because of the large groups of people involved, and because there isn't a whole lot of research on it, that then doesn't trickle back down into awareness in the general medical community. So it's been this kind of like feedback loop going for years, but it's absolutely changing now, especially in the last kind of like 5 to 10 years. It's really changing. I'm speaking to more and more people who go to their doctor, and the doctor says that sounds like it's depersonalization, which when I had it back in 2005 was that it simply didn't happen. So it's amazing to hear that you basically have like you've been putting together in your undergrad, or you put together a study like this, and are speaking to people through the internet and through forums and through WhatsApp to kind of make those studies happen and start building on that work with the tools that you have available to you, and having the experience under your belt, it's fantastic, man. It's very, very impressive. So going forward then, Lucas, in terms of working with people. Sorry, you're going to say something?
I was just saying that your description is very accurate. Like here for Brazil too, like we have very, very few professionals like that work with depersonalization, and it has much to do with what you were talking about. We have to talk in metaphors to describe depersonalization. Like even I studied that came like 2 weeks ago or 2 or 3 weeks ago. Like they analyzed the metaphors that are most common for depersonalization people to describe their experience, like bubble, like bubble, like a glass, like something like that. And so if you haven't gone through this experience, it's difficult for you to understand. Like the fact that I've gone through this, it's easier for me to understand what the people is thinking about. So in my career, like my research career, not any professor that worked with me knew about depersonalization. Like they just accepted because they liked me. But even in my master's, in my master's now, my professor, my advisor, she don't know about that, the depersonalization, but she said, well, go and work with it, because she's like supporting me, but she doesn't know what depersonalization means. Like she's learning with me, and I even gone to a psychiatrist myself, because I also deal with some ADHD symptoms. Like, so at the end of the session, I just as a matter of curiosity, I asked him how frequent was how frequently he came across people that described depersonalization like like an independent symptom, like not linked to panic disorder or other things. And he said that all this career, like it happened one time, that he saw someone that described just depersonalization, like. But I think it has much to do with what you said, and also that doctors and psychologists, they don't assess for depersonalization. They don't ask if the person is have those feelings. Like they will ask if the person is feeling down, or if the person is feeling like anxious, but they will not ask those things. So like you don't know if the person is feeling that way.
Yeah. One way I often think about it is that, if you develop the symptoms of claustrophobia out of nowhere, so maybe you had a panic attack while you were in an elevator or in a traffic jam or something, and you developed the symptoms of claustrophobia, but you had never heard of the word claustrophobia, and you went to your doctor, and your doctor has never heard of claustrophobia either. But when they describe it as being anxiety, yeah, that's correct. It does. You are describing an anxious experience. But if you can't kind of like get a diagnosis that actually describes what you're experiencing, it kind of draws a line under it and just says to you, you just, okay, that all of that time and effort that I've spent trying to figure this out, I can now stop doing that. If you don't have that, then it can just cause the anxiety to persist, because you think, well, I'm not sure what I have. The doctor doesn't seem to know what I have. And especially with an anxiety-based condition, that starts kind of like scratching away at you. You think, well, what if this is something else? But I mean, we are we are moving towards a place where DPDR will become as well known as those conditions, and when somebody walks into their doctor's office, they describe what they're experiencing, or as you mentioned, Lucas, the doctor asks for them. Then that, there's a phrase that says anxiety is caused by the fear of anxiety and DP is caused by the fear of DP. So just having a conversation with somebody who says, oh yeah, that's called depersonalization, in the same way that they said, oh, that's called claustrophobia, it takes so much of the power away from the anxiety, and allows you to view it differently and start moving towards recovery. Yeah.
People like there is this risk that people describing they fear that the doctor will say to them that in fact this is like a psychosis or schizophrenia, like, so the professionals need to be educated as well, like to know this condition, and that is something that the person is not with a worse condition like this. They just feel that way, as if they see the world as if it was unreal. So there is
it's something I found as well, Lucas, and I wondered, did you experience something similar? But like when I was going through anxiety and DP and DR, and I was sure at different points that I thought I had dementia at one point. I thought I had schizophrenia. I thought I was having a psychotic break, multiple personality disorder. Like I thought at different points all these. I also thought I was in a coma, I couldn't wake up. I thought I was asleep and couldn't wake up. I thought I was still high, couldn't come down. Anyways, but in particular with the symptoms of like dementia or schizophrenia, I mean, I'm not medically qualified at all, but I do know that, and I knew then that with conditions like schizophrenia or dementia, like there are very, very clear symptoms associated with those conditions. And that if I was displaying those symptoms, that like my family would notice them, my friends would notice them, And also I'm speaking to doctors and therapists who are trained to spot the symptoms of these conditions, and they hadn't spotted it either. So I knew that I wasn't displaying those symptoms, but I was still terrified that I had them, And I was just wondering, like, from your perspective as somebody who was like actually training in psychology at the time, that you were afraid that you were developing those conditions as well, despite not displaying any of those symptoms. Was that something that you had?
Yeah, but I think that my training was an important part of knowing that, like like schizophrenia, like has you have something like not much control over your actions sometimes. You don't remember things like sometimes, and you have to have like a family history, like of a disorder like this. So maybe my knowledge about those things were like helping me this way. And also the fact that depersonalization has this anxiety component. Like I knew that I was always an anxious child, so I knew my profile. Like I was always very scared. Like as a child, I slept with the lights on. My first day in kindergarten was like my first days. Actually, my mother had to stay with me for some time until I got comfort. So there is all this anxiety story. Like this is another thing that is in the research, that people that develop the depersonalization are had anxious parents. Like they've gone through some kind of traumatization or emotional neglect, abuse. So there is this anxiety story, like people that are afraid of interoceptive things, like they are more prone to be more attentive to their internal feelings, and the depersonalization profile is like more anxiety based and less psychotic, even though we tend to think that we had something like this.
Yeah, certainly. And also, I mean, and in my case, I mean, I definitely always would have had a tendency to be introspective and maybe overthink things and be a perfectionist. But I never had like kind of like crippling anxiety as a kid or a teenager. So when it hit me, I was just like absolutely baffled, But what what I often say to people is that, like, when the panic attack happened, I was just like, well, what is this, But like the scariest thing about a panic attack is that it appears to be happening for no reason. That's why it's a panic attack. Like, I an example I like to give is, nobody ever was like chased by a grizzly bear, got home and said, I had the worst panic attack while that grizzly bear was chasing me. My heart was beating, like, I mean, and the reason you might be displaying all the symptoms because it's fight or flight, but because there was a physical cause for it outside of yourself, you don't focus internally and panic that it means that something is wrong. But if you have that same experience, while you're in your classroom or you're having dinner with your parents or something, then you focus it internally and panic that something must be wrong. But yeah, I do speak to people like regularly who have never had any experience with anxiety in the past, and then just one day it hits them like it did me, and then you start categorizing yourself as an anxious person, which doesn't really help either. But it's great to hear that your own knowledge and awareness of these other possible conditions helped you to kind of define it for yourself and maybe make the recovery a bit easier. So Lucas, can you tell us a bit more about your work at the moment? And you mentioned earlier, kind of talking about like the like what are your thoughts on kind of interventions for DPDR and recovery, given all your experience?
Yeah, I'm working with some depersonalization patients right now. They are not easy to find them, like the people that exactly for what we were talking lately. But I have like a psychiatrist, like at my knowledge, there are 2 or 3 psychiatrists that work like that are specialized in depersonalization here in Brazil. One of them is like the person that translated the CDS, the Cambridge Depersonalization Scale, for Brazil. So when I did my undergrad thesis, I invited her to help me in the work. Like she was very glad to help. So she sends me, she passes me some of her, the patients that of the personalization that shows up for her. So I'm working with some depersonalization patients right now, and well, we're trying to work through this to see what helps and what is effective for depersonalization. I work with acceptance and commitment therapy, as I said to you, but we don't have any intervention research with this. We have very few intervention research in depersonalization, psychological intervention in depersonalization in the world. Like the bigger study was like you may have come across, like it was in 2003. It had like 21 participants. So the big, and it wasn't like randomized or controlled. It hadn't a control group. Like, so there aren't intervention studies that have a high quality or something like that, because this is very hard to do in depersonalization. But I'm trying to work with my patients with the depersonalization using acceptance and commitment therapy as a guide through the treatment.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure that like they're fact that they're speaking to somebody. It's something I encounter with people all the time, you know, is that there's a sense of there's a great sense of relief in speaking to somebody who's gone through it themselves and recovered. Because I remember like back in 2005 when I was going through this, like, I mean, I would have given the world to have just spoken to somebody who could have kind of just guided me through it, you know, which was kind of really one of the reasons I wrote the book. But it was I mean, it feels so frustrating that there's been like a general lack of information, or at least just kind of like it's like the information is out there, but kind of you have to kind of go through the forums to find it, and you have to have like, you know, 15 tabs open on your browser to kind of get the information together, as opposed to with other anxiety-based conditions where like the paths to recovery are much more delineated. They're much clearer. So I mean, I'm sure the people you're working with are like find that aspect of your own experience extremely valuable.
Yeah, and your work is also very important for our community. Like as I sent you in the email, I even recommend your channel to my patients. Like I have I have two patients that are like doing adjunct work with me and you, like your channel and the therapy with me, because
right. That's great.
Like,
wow.
One of them is one of these patients. It was like a turning point. Watching the interviews, like, was like something that changed the treatment completely. We were like working for 12 or 14 weeks, and I was like working through this kind of acceptance and like don't fight your thoughts, don't fight your feelings, like trying to making contact with those things and directing your attention to the things that are important. And it was kind of going well. But when he started to watch people's stories, like actual people with depersonalization that said like, well, when I stopped to trying to control it all the time, or stopped like fighting or struggling with depersonalization all the time, I started getting better. When he saw that, he like his depersonalization like instantly reduced like 20 or 40%. Like it was like a turning point in our treatment for one of these patients.
That is fantastic. That is what a wonderful thing to hear. And I think it kind of goes back to something you were saying earlier as well, Lucas, that when you do constantly have the worry that like, well, and I think it's symptomatic of anxiety to catastrophize that, well, my one's different, my story's different. What if I have a different version of DPDR? Like even with me, like I was certain, absolutely certain, that I had depersonalization 2.0, and that I would be in medical textbooks in the future with O'Connor's depersonalization. Like I was absolutely sure of it.
Uh-huh.
And I think that kind of when you see the recovery stories and you see that like basically everybody has those same thoughts, like everybody has those exact same worries. Everybody is just as sure that their version is different and they won't be able to recover. And when you see that that's as much of a symptom of the condition as the feeling of disconnection and the visual stuff and all, that it turns down the volume on the anxiety, and it just starts to give you the space to start to focus away from it and move away from it. So that's really, really wonderful to hear. Yeah. So it sounds like you're a pretty busy man at the moment and sounds like your life is very much back on track for you. And so what are your plans for the future, Lucas?
Yeah, so I'm doing my research, so see what we can find in my master's. I do my master's here in the same university that I graduated. So in Brazil we don't have like much of research funding, so it's very difficult to do some kind of controlled intervention study like they do in the UK or the States, like with several people using several therapists. But I think my dream was like, if I'm going to a PhD or something, to be able to do some kind of intervention study like for depersonalization, where we will test a protocol or something like that and see if it works for people with depersonalization. Maybe here or maybe in another country if I have the opportunity. This is where I see my future in my career, like my academic career. This is something that gives my life meaning, because, well, I've been there, and I want to help people that are still there, and also like helping and caring my patients, the people that come to me. Like, I think that's how I see my future.
That's so great to hear, man. Something I always ask in all of my interviews, and I'll ask you as well. So as somebody who's been through this, actually two questions. The first one is getting back to normal really getting back to normal after DPDR?
For me, absolutely not. Like that was a changing experience. Like kind of guided all my career right now. I think it's after I had it, I've gone like a compass that I acquired like in my career, like so changed everything. And I think it's I also had this opportunity to feel like my patients and like the people that suffer. So as we were talking, and something that I can say as a therapist, as when everything is okay in your life, you may get a little disconnected from your patients, because sometimes I have some kind of problem or some kind of difficult things happening in my life, and they say, "Oh, okay, that was what my patient was describing me, and I wasn't like understanding him, you know." So we have to be open to difficult things that happen. The pain is not something to be taken off from our lives. That it has a function. I think this is something that's very important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to think of any of these challenges, is that like it is there. These things ultimately always make you stronger. They always give you perspective, and they give you tools that you can rely on for the rest of your life. I was say to people, like, it's a difficult thing to go through. It is, for sure. But also when you become so intimately familiar with anxiety and you've really been through it, like that it's almost like that part of your life, or that experience with anxiety, will stand to you forever. And because the reason it turned into a problem in the first place was just kind of a misunderstanding of the condition, of the symptoms. So when you do understand it and you've come out the other side, that the normal day-to-day anxieties that we experience as human beings, and that are perfectly normal, perfectly natural, they won't escalate into something else again, because you have that awareness from your experience of saying, okay, this is just my body telling me I'm under a bit too much stress. It doesn't mean I'm going crazy. It doesn't mean I'm having an episode. It just means I didn't sleep well last night and I had 3 cups of coffee today. And that's what allows you to as you mentioned earlier about it gives you the psychological flexibility to just be like, no, it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And there'll be people watching the channel, Lucas, who might be in the same position that you were when a couple of days after you smoked that weed, and maybe are only kind of just discovering what DPDR is. But for somebody going through the same experience that you went through back in the day, do you have any words of advice for them?
Sure. I think it's difficult to address, like just saying. Like saying is easier than doing. Like it's I have to be responsible for like not being invalidating for people that suffer from depersonalization. But I think that's something that can be crucial to people is like first trying therapy, like trying to find help, even if it's difficult to find someone that understands the condition. I think it's at least if you find a flexible therapist that is prone to study and to work and to to learn what are you are feeling, even if he don't know much about depersonalization. I think it can be very helpful. Also, all the meds and things like this that can help too. But if I could say something like right now, it's there is this acceptance and commitment therapy metaphor that is called Tug-Of-War. Like there's a metaphor that it's like with anxiety and all these things that we feel that are difficult. It seems like we are like pulling a rope to all the time, pulling a rope to being in a fight or in a struggle that is consistent with the symptoms and these difficult things. So it is very tiring. It's very tiring. And it is something that if people ask themselves if this is if it works, they will see that much of the time it doesn't work, because I can alleviate the symptoms for a bit, but it will come back. So I'm never winning. I'm never like winning this game. Like the anxiety will always ask me again to play with it, like and so something that is an alternative to this is like, what if you can like drop this rope like for a bit? Like, what can you do with your arms and legs and with your mouth, with your eyes and with your ears, when you are not overly focused in that game that the anxiety is inviting you to play with it? Like, just what can you do if you are not putting all your effort and attention to that game? I think it's something that I could say.
That's excellent advice. Lucas, it has been so lovely having you on the channel today. Thank you for sharing your experience, and it is so exciting to hear that that you're part of like a generation of therapists coming up who you went through it yourself, and you're researching it and raising awareness of it. Please do keep in touch about your work and any kind of research you have happening in the future. I'd love to hear more about it. And I know there's going to be people watching the channel who will find your story inspirational. And so thank you for your openness and for your research and for raising awareness. It's been so lovely speaking with you today, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for inviting me, and your work is fantastic and very important for our community.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Take care, Lucas. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.